The morning I told my mother-in-law I was pregnant, she looked me dead in the eyes, smiled, and said, "How convenient." I should have understood everything right then, but I was 28 years old, 12 weeks along, and so desperate to believe that the woman my husband called the most important person in my life would eventually come around. So I laughed it off. I told myself she was just surprised. I told myself she needed time. I had been telling myself that for 3 years. My husband, I'll call him by what he was to me then. My husband had been raised in a house where his mother's word was the final word on everything: what she cooked, what they watched, where they vacationed, who he dated. She had a gift for making every decision feel like it was coming from love when it was really coming from control. He couldn't see the difference. By the time I met him, he had been trained not to. His name was Donovan. He was 31 when we married, handsome in the way that photographs well but doesn't hold up under pressure, and he loved me in the way that some men love women, completely until someone more important told him not to. His mother's name was Sylvia. I want you to understand something about Sylvia before I go any further. She was not a loud woman. She was not the kind of mother-in-law who screams at holiday dinners or sends passive-aggressive texts. She was elegant. She wore pearl earrings and spoke in a measured voice and always offered to help with the dishes. She made you feel, in every interaction, that you were slightly less put together than she was. That was her power. She didn't attack. She eroded. From the day Donovan introduced us, she was pleasant to my face and relentless behind my back. I found out later, much later, that she had told Donovan within the first month that I was the kind of girl who would pull you away from your family, that I was ambitious in a way that doesn't leave room for a husband, that I had a certain energy she couldn't quite put her finger on, but that worried her. I was a CPA. I had my own small accounting practice. I worked hard, I paid my taxes, I called my own mother every Sunday. The thing that worried Sylvia was that I didn't need anything from her. We got married anyway. Donovan proposed, I said yes, and Sylvia threw us a beautiful engagement party at her house in Naperville and toasted to our happiness with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I told myself I was imagining things. The first 2 years of our marriage were fine in the way that things can be fine when you're mostly ignoring a slow leak in the ceiling. We had a nice apartment in Chicago. I kept growing my practice. Donovan worked in commercial real estate. We had dinners with Sylvia every other Sunday, and I would come home from those dinners with a tension headache that I would take 2 Advil for and never mention. Then I got pregnant. I want to tell you that the pregnancy was planned and joyful, and that I floated through those first weeks on a cloud of excited anticipation. The truth is messier. We had been trying for almost a year, and I had started to carry the quiet weight of wondering if it was ever going to happen. And when the test came back positive, I sat on the bathroom floor for 10 minutes just breathing. It was one of the most private moments of my life. I didn't even call my mother first. I just sat there with this enormous feeling I didn't have a name for. Donovan was thrilled, genuinely, completely thrilled, in a way I hadn't seen from him in a long time. He picked me up off the ground in our kitchen and spun me around, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing that pulls us back to center. We decided to tell his mother in person. I suggested waiting a little longer, just until we were past the first trimester. But Donovan was already picking up the phone. He wanted to tell her immediately. Of course he did. We drove out to Naperville that Saturday. Sylvia had made lunch. She always made lunch, another one of her quiet power moves. Feeding you so you felt indebted before you'd said a word. We sat at her dining room table with its ironed linen placemats, and she poured iced tea, and Donovan told her we were expecting. She set her glass down very carefully. She looked at me, not at him, and she said, "How convenient." Donovan laughed. He actually laughed, like it was a joke, like his mother hadn't just looked at his pregnant wife and implied she had gotten pregnant on purpose for some kind of personal gain. He said, "Mom, come on." She smiled and said she was only teasing and reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and her fingers were cold, and I understood in that moment, with a clarity that I hadn't allowed myself before, that this woman was never going to accept me. not the pregnancy, not the baby, not me. I didn't say anything. I smiled back. I ate my chicken salad sandwich. I drove home with Donovan and listened to him talk about how happy she was, how she'd come around, how she was just a little surprised. I nodded in all the right places. And that night, when he fell asleep, I lay in the dark and thought about what how convenient actually meant. It meant the money. I hadn't known about the money when I married Donovan. He wasn't secretive about it exactly, but he wasn't forthcoming either, and I hadn't thought to ask. It wasn't until our first year of marriage that I learned his grandfather had set up a trust, a significant one, somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million that would pass to Donovan upon the birth of his first child. The executor of the trust was Sylvia, which meant that until a grandchild arrived, Sylvia controlled the disbursement of the interest, and she had been using that interest quietly, steadily, to supplement her own lifestyle for years. A baby meant the trust transferred. A baby meant Sylvia's access ended. I had been a CPA for 6 years. I understood exactly what that meant. I want to be clear that I did not marry Donovan for the trust. I didn't know about it. But the moment I did know, I understood why Sylvia had been so relentless about finding me unacceptable, why every girlfriend before me had eventually been discouraged. Why a 31-year-old man with a good job and a charming smile had somehow never managed to stay in a relationship long enough to start a family. Sylvia had been protecting her income, and she had been doing it for years. The pregnancy changed the dynamic in ways I wasn't fully prepared for. Sylvia began calling Donovan more, stopping by the apartment with casseroles, suggesting that we consider moving to a bigger place, in Naperville, closer to her. She started using the phrase "our family" in a way that was pointed, deliberate, as if to remind me that I was the newest and least permanent member of it. She also started asking questions about my health in a way that felt less like concern and more like auditing. Was I taking the right vitamins? Was my doctor reputable? Had I considered that stress from work could be harmful to the baby? Maybe I should think about stepping back from my practice, just for the pregnancy, just to be safe. I didn't step back. I worked until 34 weeks. At 20 weeks, I found out I was carrying twins. I tell people this part of the story, and they always assume it made things better, that twins would somehow soften Sylvia or distract her or make the whole situation feel too large for her to keep managing. It did not. If anything, it sharpened her. 2 grandchildren meant the trust transfer was undeniable. There was no ambiguity, no what if, no hoping for a miscarriage and a reset. The clock was running. About a month after the twins' announcement, I started feeling sick in ways that didn't feel like pregnancy sick. Not nausea, not fatigue. A kind of bone-deep wrongness, like my body was running a process I hadn't authorized. I mentioned it to my LB, who ran some tests and found my liver enzyme slightly elevated. She asked about my diet, my supplements, anything new I'd been consuming. I couldn't think of anything. Sylvia had been bringing food every week. I want to say I connected those dots immediately. I didn't. You don't. When it's someone you've been trained to give the benefit of the doubt, you find 17 other explanations before you land on the real one. I told myself it was the prenatal vitamins, the new brand I'd switched to, something environmental. Then one evening, I was alone in the kitchen and I opened the container of herbal tea Sylvia had brought over, a blend she'd specifically recommended for pregnancy, something she'd bought from a specialty store in the suburbs, and something stopped me. I don't know what. Some instinct, some small voice that had been trying to get my attention for months. I didn't drink it. I put it in a bag, sealed it, and drove it to a lab the next morning and paid out of pocket to have it analyzed. It came back with trace amounts of pennyroyal. If you don't know what pennyroyal is, it's an herb that has been used historically and dangerously to induce miscarriage. It is toxic, it has killed women. It is absolutely not something that ends up in pregnancy tea by accident. I sat in my car in the parking lot of that lab and I did not cry. I had moved past crying. I felt something much colder and much cleaner than tears. I felt the absolute end of any remaining goodwill I had been carrying for 3 years. And then I drove home, kissed my husband hello, and called my attorney. I did not tell Donovan, not yet. Not because I didn't trust him exactly, but because I had watched him choose his mother over reality so many times that I knew with a horrible certainty that telling him first would give Sylvia time to prepare. I was done giving anyone in that family time to prepare. My attorney was a woman I'd used for a business contract dispute the year before. Sharp, methodical, not easily rattled. I told her everything: the tea, the lab report, the trust, the timeline. She told me to make 3 copies of the lab report and keep them in separate locations. She told me not to change my behavior around Sylvia. She told me we needed to move carefully because what I was dealing with was potentially a criminal matter, and I needed to not do anything that could compromise it. I went home that night and made dinner like nothing had happened. Over the next 3 weeks, I kept detailed notes, dates and times that Sylvia had brought food or drink, photographs of the containers. I retrieved the voicemail she had left me 2 months earlier recommending the tea and saved it in 3 places. My attorney connected me with a family law specialist named Warren who had handled cases involving trust disputes, and together we built a picture of what had been happening. What Sylvia had been doing was not impulsive. She had been gradually, deliberately trying to end the pregnancy, first with stress, with pressure, with the suggestion that I reduce my work and increase my dependence on her, and when that hadn't worked, with something more direct. The pennyroyal was not a one-time addition. The lab found evidence it had been in multiple batches. She had been consistent. At 32 weeks, I went into early labor. My water broke at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, and Donovan drove me to Northwestern Memorial, and I was in the hospital for 11 hours before our twins were delivered by emergency C-section, a girl and a boy, both healthy, both screaming, both absolutely real in a way that made everything that had happened in the preceding months feel even more unforgivable. Sylvia arrived at the hospital 3 hours after the birth. I want to be honest about what happened in that room because I think this is the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived through something like it. Donovan had called her, of course, and she came in wearing her pearl earrings and carrying a pink and bloom bouquet, and she kissed Donovan on the cheek and looked at the babies in their bassinets, and her face did something complicated that I watched very carefully. There was something that might have been love. There was something that was definitely calculation. And then she sat down next to my hospital bed and she said very quietly, so only I could hear, "You look exhausted. You really should have rested more during the pregnancy. I told Donovan you were overworking yourself." I looked at her. I thought about the lab report in my attorney's files. I thought about the voicemail. I thought about my daughter and my son 6 feet away in their bassinets. I said, "You're right. I should have taken better care of myself." She patted my hand. 3 days later, after I was home, after the babies were settled, after Donovan had gone back to work for a half day, I called my attorney and told her I was ready to move. What followed was not fast or cinematic, it was paperwork. It was a conversation with a detective from the Chicago PD who specialized in domestic cases and listened to everything I had without visible emotion, and then asked me to come in the following week to give a formal statement. It was a conversation with a trust attorney who reviewed the original documents and confirmed that the terms were clear, the transfer was required, and that any interference with that process, including any action taken to prevent the qualifying event, constituted fraud at minimum and potentially criminal conspiracy. It was also, eventually, a conversation with Donovan. I had that conversation on a Thursday evening, 6 days after I came home from the hospital. Both babies were asleep. I had made coffee. I sat down across from my husband at our kitchen table and I told him everything, beginning with the lab report and ending with the detective's name and phone number, which I wrote on a piece of paper and slid across the table to him. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You have to be wrong." I had prepared for this. I had a folder. I opened it and laid out the lab report, the timeline of food deliveries, the voicemail transcript, the trust documents, the attorney's preliminary assessment. I put them in front of him one at a time, slowly, the way you would explain a financial statement to a client who really did not want to hear what the numbers said. He looked at all of it. His face did things I didn't have language for. Then he said she wouldn't do this. And I said, Donovan, I know you need time to process this. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, but I need you to understand that this is already in motion. The decision about whether to press charges is not mine alone to make anymore. And whatever you choose to do, I need you to know that I am going to protect our children. He slept on the couch that night, and the night after. And the night after that, Sylvia was arrested 7 weeks later. The charge was felony poisoning. The DA's office took the case seriously, more seriously than I had allowed myself to hope, because the lab evidence was clean and the trust motive was documented, and Sylvia, it turned out, had made purchases consistent with the substance at a specialty herb shop in Oak Park that had records and a very cooperative owner. She did not go quietly. Her defense attorney argued that the amounts were too small to be meaningful, that I had planted the evidence, that I had a financial motive to destroy the family's reputation. That last one was almost funny, given what we were actually talking about. The trust transferred automatically upon the birth of the twins, per the original terms. Sylvia's access to the interest ended the day my children were born. Warren told me this with the flat affect of someone delivering information, not comfort, but I felt something shift in my chest when he said it. 4 years of her managing that money. 4 years of that being the thing she was protecting. And it ended anyway, the way things like that always end, with the very outcome she had destroyed herself trying to prevent. Donovan and I did not make it. I want to be honest about this because I think it's the part of the story that people find most uncomfortable. The idea that there isn't a version of this where you stay. He tried, he went to therapy. He made sincere, painful efforts to reconcile who his mother actually was with who he had believed her to be. But there is a specific kind of damage that comes from watching your husband hear that his mother poisoned your food for months and then ask you, 6 days later, if you're sure the lab got it right. That damage does not unhappen. I tried to want to stay. I couldn't. We divorced when the twins were 14 months old. It was not ugly, which surprised me. He agreed to joint custody and fair support, and I think part of him was relieved to have the structure of a legal agreement telling him exactly what he owed me because it meant he didn't have to figure it out on his own. He still sees the kids every other weekend. He is, to his credit, a better father than I would have predicted. Sylvia was convicted. She received a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation, which felt, frankly, insufficient. But the prosecuting attorney told me that first offense poisoning cases in Illinois rarely result in incarceration when the defendant has no prior record and the amounts are sublethal. I went home from the sentencing and sat with my 2 kids on the living room floor, and I looked at their faces and I decided that the outcome in the courtroom was not the only outcome that mattered. The trust had transferred. My children were healthy. She would never be unsupervised around them again. The account was not fully settled, but it was closed. I run my accounting practice out of a 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park now. I have an assistant and 3 regular corporate clients and enough work to keep me occupied without consuming me. My kids go to a daycare 3 blocks away, run by a woman who sends me photos throughout the day of them eating crackers and discovering mud puddles. My mother drives up from Springfield once a month and stays for the weekend, and spoils them absolutely rotten, and I let her, because that is what safe grandmothers are for. I don't think about Sylvia every day anymore. I did for a long time, not with anger exactly, but with a kind of ongoing processing, like my brain needed to keep returning to the data to make sure I had understood it correctly. I had understood it correctly. I had understood it correctly. She had weighed her access to a trust fund against her son's wife and unborn grandchildren, and the trust fund had won, and she had acted on that calculation with a consistency and a patience that I found, professionally, almost impressive. Almost. People ask me sometimes if I blame Donovan. The honest answer is that I used to, more than I do now. He didn't poison my food. He didn't know. But he created the conditions that made me vulnerable to someone who would, and he spent years choosing not to see his mother clearly because seeing her clearly was uncomfortable and I was easier to doubt than she was. That is its own kind of failure. Not a criminal one, just a human one and a costly one, and one that I eventually decided was not my failure to carry. What I want to say to anyone who is reading this and recognizes something in it, the erosion that happens so slowly you don't notice until you're half gone. The way you talk yourself out of your own instincts because the alternative explanation is one you can't yet afford to believe. Is this your body knows before your brain admits it? I stood in my kitchen with that container of tea and something stopped my hand. I want you to trust that thing. Whatever that thing is in you, the part that goes quiet before you make a decision and makes itself heard anyway. Trust it earlier than I did. Document everything. Find one person outside the situation who will help you see it clearly and understand that leaving something that was trying to kill you slowly and politely and with pearl earrings on is not a failure. It is the most intelligent financial and personal decision you will ever make. My daughter is 22 months old now. My son is the same age, obviously, because that is how twins work. And sometimes I catch myself laughing at small things again, and it takes me a second to remember that this is allowed. That this is, in fact, the whole point. The babies don't know what happened before they arrived. They just know the condo and the daycare and their grandmother's visits and the way I hold them at the end of every day like they are both the weight and the proof of something I almost didn't get to keep. That is what I built on the other side of all of it. Not an empire, not a revenge fantasy, not a performance of triumph for anyone who doubted me. Just this. 2 kids on a living room floor. A life that no one else can access without my permission. It turns out that is more than enough. I still think about the moment I stood in my kitchen holding that container of tea and something in me just stopped. No dramatic voice, no sudden revelation, just a stillness that I had spent 3 years talking myself out of, finally getting the last word. That moment taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. The people who mean to harm you rarely announce it. Sylvia never raised her voice at me. She brought casseroles. She offered advice about prenatal vitamins. She smiled at my babies with something that might have passed for warmth if you weren't watching carefully. The harm she intended was wrapped in the same packaging as care, and that is exactly why it worked as long as it did. I kept explaining away my own instincts because she kept behaving like someone who deserved the benefit of the doubt. That is how erosion works. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps going until you check and find that something load-bearing is gone. What protected me in the end wasn't luck. It was a set of choices I'd made over years without fully understanding I was making them. The choice to build a skill set that belonged to me and no one else. The choice to keep my own financial independence, even when it made Sylvia uncomfortable. The choice to find an attorney before I needed one urgently. I had kept my thinking sharp even when the situation was designed to make me feel small. That sharpness is what I used when it mattered. Numbers don't lie. Lab reports don't lie, and a woman who has spent 6 years reading financial statements knows exactly how to read a motive. I didn't defeat Sylvia with anger. I defeated her with documentation. But I want to be honest about what the documentation alone couldn't do. The lab report told me what had happened. It didn't tell me how to sit across from my husband at our kitchen table and watch his face when he read it. It didn't tell me how to keep functioning, feeding 2 newborns, answering client emails, showing up while carrying the weight of what I knew. That part required something different, a willingness to keep going when the situation had become genuinely unbearable. Not because I was fearless, but because my children were 6 feet away in their bassinets and I did not have the option of falling apart. Resilience is not a personality trait. It is a decision you make at 2 in the morning when you would very much prefer not to. What I understand now is that those 3 things work together. Doing the right thing, not retaliating, not warning Sylvia, not giving her time to destroy evidence, kept the case intact. Thinking clearly when everything in me wanted to react emotionally kept me from making mistakes I couldn't undo, and refusing to stop even when Donovan asked me if I was sure, even when the defense attorney tried to make me the villain, kept the outcome from being taken from me. Sylvia made her calculation and she lost, not because the universe punished her, but because her plan had a flaw she didn't account for. She underestimated what I was willing to do to protect my kids. That is not a cosmic law. That is just cause and consequence, plain and clear. The same logic that runs through every spreadsheet I have ever built. My twins are almost 2 years old. They are loud and willful and completely unaware of what it costs to get them here safely. I intend to keep it that way for as long as I possibly can.